Hello, everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast, as part of a Proxyl interlude or Proxyl intermission. This audio podcast, as part of a Cataclysm Chiasma. This audio podcast, as part of a Storm Robotics a Storm Robotics production. This audio podcast, a little bit around the physiology behind coping and in context of chronic kidney disease. The physiological mechanism of action behind coping strategies utilizing long-standing disease such as CKD or chronic kidney disease, chronic kidney disease is unknown and has not been investigated sort of experimentally. It may be that particular ways of construing optimistic and undesirable trials are adaptable, thus affect in distinct lifestyles thus affecting distinct lifestyles which um, which house each the optimistic and undesirable perspective. So, for example, emotion focused coping, where emotion focused coping where loss ultimately upsurges, the probability of discouraged mood through seclusion because an individual reduces chances or probability to grasp acquaintances. This can prime to detachment, separation, and despair. One of the sort of fathers of stress and coping research, Hans Seni, who was a clinical endocrinologist and an experimental biologist, who focused efforts on exhaustive study on an exhaustive investigation of the stress response. Under Seni's physiological example, traumatic characteristics as such don't really compose a dominating part in defining the sort of defining the part of the pressure reaction and consequence well-being and consequence where well-being results in data owing to the stimulus of the center conditioning influences whatever may generally be described a typically well-adapted gradation of trauma can become lasting for people with susceptible physiology and in diseases and in diseased sort of conditions, thus causing to adapt or cope with health with thus causing to adapt or cope with a health complaint. It is possible that there may be endocrine or neurobiological components allied with emotion-focused coping, which modifies through neurochemical pathways. It's supplementary that coping promotes the progress of a sensation as a result of unhurried thinking. This can lead an individual to devising undesirable perspectives or confines the reasoning or somatic operation the reasoning or somatic operation linked to coping. The interactions between the neuroendocrine and the immune system and the immune system and the immune system have been projected in amongst the literature. One study investigated a relationship and an association concerning coping and a range of behaviors in around depression and discovering noteworthy alterations in categories of behavior reliant on trauma severity. Research has highlighted that positive coping attitude is linked with physiological results amongst individuals with clinical disease, but further exploration has not expanded into the chronic illness realms. A held understanding is rage and despair are convolutedly convolutedly associated rage in excess or twisted in tips to or towards to melancholy. A person's way of surviving or coping with rage could be connected to the possibility of a person facing despair. If a person utilizes behaviors that associate to efficiently handling and clearing feelings of rage or augmenting favorable behavior, the individual's probability of rising despair can reduce. Studying coping or looking at coping with specific chronic illnesses can allow investigators to implement stress constants that are usual across healthy and individuals with with sort of disease with sort of diseases or conditions, reducing the ambiguous elements fashioned when susceptible systems. So, for example, specific immunological markers are not isolated. Another aspect retrieved by physiological perspective is the proposition that individuals with particular conditions are sort of labeled as fragile to effects of a further who are labeled sort of fragile or to the effects of further bring on to the effects or bring on or prompt the effects of further stressors. It's important to note expression of excessive stress and trauma, i.e. frequent and severe symptoms, are not predestined but can influence immunological responses. Tension is a circumstance of the interface of connecting a stressor, external and internal conditioning factors. Strengthening coping resources in individuals should alter the perception of identity and surroundings, reducing feelings of harm, minimizing and avoiding consequent physiological strain and reaction. Coping is not restricted to psychology. Indeed, psychology, anxiety influences should perhaps be regarded as part of a sort of an extended sort of topic, but also the endocrine and immune systems. That draws this audio podcast to a close. This audio podcast as part of a Proxyl interlude. This audio podcast as part of a Cataclysm Chiasma. This audio podcast as part of a Storm Lobostics production.